The alarm clock buzzed, sharp and unrelenting, cutting through the thick fog of sleep. Jake's eyelids fluttered open, but all he could focus on was the pounding in his head. It felt like a jackhammer was drilling into his skull from the inside out. He groaned, rolling over, his body heavy and sluggish, unwilling to leave the comfort of his bed. His mouth was dry, and his limbs felt weak, as if the weight of the night before was still clinging to him, refusing to let go. He barely remembered how he had gotten home, let alone what had happened after midnight. The faint scent of stale alcohol and smoke lingered in the room, a constant reminder of the reckless decisions he'd made the night before. Jake groaned again, burying his face in his pillow, hoping to escape the onslaught of memories that slowly began to creep in. The party, the loud music, the flashing lights, the laughter and chaos. It all felt so distant now, like a fever dream he couldn't fully recall. But he knew one thing for certain. He had crossed a line. As he lay there, eyes squeezed shut, trying to piece together the events of the night, the sound of footsteps echoed from downstairs. It was his mom, the one person who had been his rock, his constant throughout his life. She was already up, likely in the kitchen, preparing breakfast, just like she always did. The thought of facing her like this made Jake's stomach churn. He didn't want her to know. Not like this. His mom was a dedicated, hard-working woman who had spent her life building a stable foundation for her family. She had always been there for him. And though he had never fully appreciated it, Jake knew deep down that she was everything to him. She didn't deserve to see him like this, a mess of his own making. It was bad enough he had to live with the shame of the night before, but he wasn't sure he could bear her disappointment. Jake slowly forced himself to sit up. The world around him spun for a moment, and he had to grip the edge of the bed to steady himself. His stomach roiled, threatening to betray him again, but he swallowed hard, determined to keep it together. The last thing he needed was for his mom to walk in and see him struggling. He rubbed his eyes, trying to clear the fog, but it seemed impossible to escape the haze of guilt and pain that clouded his mind. His head throbbed with every passing second, and he could feel the remnants of the alcohol still swirling in his veins. It wasn't just a hangover, it was a reckoning. This wasn't just about what had happened the night before. It was about the person he had become, the choices he had made, and the consequences he was now facing. Jake stood up, his legs shaky beneath him. The floor seemed to sway as he stumbled toward the bathroom, gripping the doorframe for support. He caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror and immediately regretted it. His hair was messy, his face pale, and his eyes bloodshot. He looked like someone who had been to hell and back, and in some ways he had. The truth was, this wasn't the first time he had let things get out of hand, but this time felt different. He couldn't quite put his finger on why, but it did. As he splashed cold water on his face, he wondered how he had ended up here. He had always been the responsible one, the one who got good grades, stayed out of trouble, and did what was expected of him. His parents were proud of him, his mom especially. But last night, none of that mattered. Last night, he had thrown caution to the wind and stepped into a world he didn't truly understand, a world where consequences seemed like a distant thought, something that wouldn't catch up with him until it was too late. But now, sitting on the edge of the bathroom sink, Jake realized just how wrong he had been. The decision to go to that party had been his first mistake, and it had led to a chain of events that had spiraled far beyond his control. The friends he thought he could trust had encouraged him to drink, to keep going, to be part of something bigger than himself. At first, it had been fun, a rush even. But as the night wore on, things started to blur. The lines between fun and reckless behavior became dangerously thin, and before he knew it, he had crossed them. Jake took a deep breath, trying to calm the racing thoughts in his head. The more he thought about the night before, the worse it seemed. His body felt like a reminder of everything he had done wrong, but the worst part, he hadn't just made a mistake, he had hidden it from his mom. He'd lied to her the moment she asked if he was okay. When she had sensed something was off, he had brushed it off, pretending everything was fine, as though he could somehow trick her into believing he was still the same son she had raised all these years. But deep down, Jake knew that he couldn't keep up the act forever. His mom had always been able to see right through him. She knew when something was wrong, even when he tried to hide it behind a smile. She had been his greatest supporter, always there with a hug or a word of encouragement when he needed it most. And now, after everything that had happened, he didn't know if he could bear her disappointment. With a shaky hand, Jake reached for his phone. He didn't want to see the messages, the photos, or the texts from his friends. He didn't want to be reminded of the party, of the wild, careless behavior that had led him to this point. But the temptation was too strong. He unlocked his phone and opened his messages. As soon as he saw the first few texts, his stomach turned. The photos were everywhere. There he was, laughing, holding a drink in his hand, surrounded by people he barely knew. A small part of him was embarrassed, but a bigger part of him felt a deep sense of dread. The truth was out there now, and what made it worse was that his mom had seen the same photos. He had no idea how she had found out, but she had. And now, there was no going back. Jake's heart sank as he read through the messages from his friends, some of them joking, some apologizing, but all of them acknowledging the fact that the night's events had been captured for everyone to see. It was too late to undo the damage, to erase the mistakes, to take back the decisions he had made. But one thing was certain: he had to face the consequences, and he had to do it soon. He took one last look at himself in the mirror. His reflection stared back at him, a reminder of the lies he had told, the choices he had made, and the road ahead. But the most painful part was the realization that the one person who had always believed in him, the one person he couldn't afford to disappoint, was waiting downstairs. She was waiting for him to come clean, to be honest, to face the truth. Jake knew that no matter how much he tried to hide it, no matter how much he pretended that everything was fine, the truth would always find a way to surface. And now, it was time for him to deal with the consequences, to finally take responsibility for his actions. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and braced himself. There was no turning back now. The hardest conversation of his life was waiting for him, and whether he was ready or not, he had to face it. Jake's heart pounded as he slowly made his way down the stairs. The sound of his mom humming in the kitchen only amplified his sense of dread. He didn't want to face her, not like this. But the truth was, he couldn't avoid it any longer. His stomach twisted with knots as he imagined what she might say, what she might feel when she found out just how far he'd strayed from the person she had always believed him to be. The stairs creaked under his feet, and each step seemed to echo through the house like a countdown. His palms were clammy, his mouth dry. He could hear the soft clatter of plates from the kitchen as his mom prepared breakfast, her routine as steady and comforting as it had always been. She didn't know. She didn't know what he had done, what he was hiding. The very thought of lying to her again, pretending like everything was fine, felt like a betrayal. But how could he admit the truth? How could he tell her that the responsible, upstanding son she'd raised had spent the night drinking, partying, and making reckless decisions? His mind raced, and for a moment, he thought about turning around and retreating back to his room. But something inside of him pushed him forward. He couldn't run away from this. Not anymore. The truth would come out, and sooner or later, he would have to confront it. When he reached the kitchen, he stood in the doorway, hesitating for a moment before stepping inside. His mom stood by the stove, flipping pancakes with her usual care, the scent of warm syrup filling the air. She didn't look up at him right away, but Jake noticed the slight shift in her posture, the way she seemed to sense his presence even before he spoke. "Morning, Jake," she said, her voice light and cheerful, but there was a hint of something else there, something he couldn't quite place. Maybe it was concern, maybe it was something deeper. But whatever it was, it made his chest tighten. "Morning, Mom," Jake replied, his voice betraying him with an unintentional shakiness. He cleared his throat, trying to steady himself. He couldn't let her see how much he was struggling. He had to keep it together, at least for now. His mom turned to face him, a warm smile on her face. "You feeling better today? You looked a little rough when you woke up." Jake froze. She had noticed. His heart skipped a beat, and for a brief second, he wondered if she had already put two and two together. He was about to open his mouth, to come up with some excuse, when she held up a hand, cutting him off. "Don't worry, Jake. You don't have to tell me what happened. I know you're going through something, but I'm here for you, okay?" Her tone was gentle, almost too gentle, as if she were treading carefully, waiting for him to speak. Jake's stomach churned. How had she known? He hadn't said a word, and yet, somehow, she seemed to know exactly what was going on. His mom always had a way of seeing through him, of understanding him when no one else could. It was both comforting and terrifying at the same time. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. He had spent the last few hours trying to come up with a way to explain himself, to make things right. But now, with her standing there, offering him a chance to be honest, he realized how hard it was going to be. The weight of his actions, the lies, the shame, it all pressed down on him in that moment, threatening to crush him. His mom set the spatula down and stepped closer to him, her expression softening. "Jake, if there's something you want to talk about, you know you can always come to me. I'm not going to judge you, I just want to help." It was as if she was giving him permission, offering him an out. All he had to do was open up, tell her the truth, and everything could start to heal. But could he really do it? Could he face her and admit what he had done? Could he stand there and tell her that he wasn't the perfect son she had raised? Jake shook his head, feeling overwhelmed. "Mom, His voice faltered, and he had to swallow hard to steady himself. He was so close to telling her, so close to coming clean. But the fear of her disappointment, the shame of his actions, held him back. Before he could continue, his mom stepped forward, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. "Jake, listen to me. I've known you your whole life. I've seen you go through so many challenges, and I've watched you grow into an incredible young man. But I also know that no one is perfect. We all make mistakes. It's how we handle those mistakes that matters." Jake's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time that morning, he let himself feel the weight of everything. His mom was right. He had made a mistake, a big one. And no matter how hard he tried to hide it, no matter how much he pretended everything was fine, the truth had a way of coming out. "I messed up," Jake whispered, his voice barely audible. "I did something really stupid last night, and I don't know how to fix it." His mom's expression softened further, her eyes filled with understanding. She didn't press him to elaborate right away. Instead, she simply nodded, giving him the space he needed to collect his thoughts. "It's okay," she said quietly. "You don't have to tell me everything right now. I'm just glad you're being honest with me." The words hung in the air, and for a long moment, neither of them said anything. Jake felt the weight of his mom's support, her unconditional love for him, and it made him realize just how much he had taken her for granted. She wasn't angry with him. She wasn't scolding him or blaming him for what had happened. She was simply there, waiting for him to open up, waiting for him to take responsibility for his actions. Finally, Jake spoke, his voice more steady now. "I went to a party last night. It wasn't like me. I drank too much. I don't even remember some of it. And now I'm just ashamed." His mom's face remained calm, but her eyes darkened with concern. She didn't interrupt him, but her expression spoke volumes. She had known something was off. And now it all made sense. "Jake," she said softly, "you're not alone in this. I'm here, and we'll get through it together. But you need to know that the choices you make today will affect your tomorrow." Jake nodded, his throat tight. His mom was right, of course. The truth was, he hadn't been thinking about his future when he made those decisions. He had been thinking about fitting in, about escaping the pressure he felt, about seeking approval from people who didn't really care about him. And now, here he was, facing the consequences of those choices. "Mom, "I'm sorry," Jake said, his voice thick with emotion. "I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't know how to deal with everything. And I thought if I just had a little fun, it would make it all go away. But it didn't. It just made things worse." His mom pulled him into a hug, her arms wrapping around him with a tenderness that made him feel like he had finally come home. "I know, Jake. I know. We all make mistakes. But what matters is what you do next. And I believe in you. I always have." Tears streamed down Jake's face, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of relief. His mom wasn't angry. She wasn't disappointed. She was just there, offering him her love and support, reminding him that even when things seemed hopeless, he could always make a change. As they stood there, wrapped in that quiet moment of understanding, Jake realized that the path ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be hard conversations, tough choices, and moments of doubt. But with his mom by his side, he knew he could face whatever came next. He wasn't alone in this, and that was enough to give him hope for the future. And as he stepped back from the embrace, wiping his tears, he knew one thing for sure. This was the beginning of his journey to make things right. And no matter how difficult it might be, he was ready to take that first step. Jake stood at the edge of the driveway, staring at his mom's car as it disappeared down the street. She had left for work, and the house felt eerily quiet in her absence. The warmth and comfort that had filled the kitchen earlier seemed to vanish with her departure, leaving him to face the reality of his actions on his own. Despite the weight of the conversation they'd had that morning, Jake felt a sense of unease settling over him, a tension he couldn't quite shake. He glanced down at his phone in his hand, the screen still lit up with messages from the friends he had partied with the night before. They had been texting all morning, some offering support, others asking for more party pictures, and one or two joking about how crazy the night had been. But there was no question in Jake's mind. He didn't want to be part of that world anymore. The reckless behavior, the late nights, the alcohol, it all felt so empty now. All of it had led him to this moment, standing alone, trying to pick up the pieces of his life. As much as he wanted to push the whole thing aside and pretend that nothing had happened, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that this was a turning point for him. His mom had forgiven him, or at least she had shown him understanding. But there was still so much more work to do, so many more conversations to have. And deep down, Jake knew that the road to redemption wasn't going to be as easy as he hoped. It was going to take more than just a heartfelt apology. With a sigh, he walked back into the house, his feet dragging as if he were carrying the weight of the world. He hadn't felt this lost in a long time. The pressure of expectations, the constant striving to be perfect, the fear of letting people down, it had all become too much. And in a moment of weakness, he had made a choice that he couldn't take back. He had chosen to escape rather than face it. Sitting down on the couch, Jake closed his eyes and replayed the events of the past few weeks in his mind. His grades had slipped, his relationships with friends were strained, and he had started to pull away from his family. For the first time, he was beginning to see the pattern, the downward spiral that had led him to this point. And now, after everything had come crashing down, he realized just how far he had drifted from the person he wanted to be. It wasn't just about the party. It was about all the little decisions he had made along the way, skipping class, lying to his mom, hiding his true feelings. He had been afraid to confront the pressure he felt, afraid of being judged, and in doing so, he had become someone he didn't even recognize. The buzzing of his phone broke him out of his thoughts. It was a text from his best friend, Matt. "Yo, are you good? Everyone's talking about the photos from last night. People are losing their minds. You're the life of the party, bro." Jake stared at the message for a long moment before responding. The urge to send a sarcastic reply, to pretend everything was fine, was strong. But then he remembered the conversation with his mom, the one where she had shown him that even when things were messy, he didn't have to face them alone. She had given him the courage to be honest with himself, and now he needed to do the same with his friends. He tapped out a response. "I'm not doing okay, Matt. I made some bad choices last night, and I'm paying for it. I need to figure some things out." The response came quickly. "Man, what are you talking about? It was just a party. You're fine. Don't make a big deal out of it." Jake let out a breath, feeling the weight of Matt's words pressing down on him. It was exactly the kind of response he had expected. People didn't want to hear about struggles or regrets. They wanted to keep the party going, to keep pretending that everything was perfect. But Jake couldn't do that anymore. He couldn't keep living in that bubble of denial, pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. He stared at his phone for a few moments longer, then tossed it onto the coffee table with a frustrated sigh. He wasn't ready for that conversation yet, not with Matt or anyone else. What he needed right now was time to figure out what he wanted for himself. Time to work through the feelings of shame and confusion that had been building up inside him. The next few days passed in a blur. Jake went through the motions of daily life: school, homework, dinner with his mom. But his mind was elsewhere. He kept thinking about the conversation they had had that morning, how she had shown him such compassion and understanding. It was exactly what he needed, but it wasn't enough. Jake knew that real change would take more than just words. He needed to make some real decisions, take real action. One evening after dinner, Jake sat down with his mom at the kitchen table. The tension from the past few days hung in the air, but there was also a sense of calm. His mom had been patient with him, giving him the space to come to terms with everything that had happened. But Jake knew it was time to open up fully. He couldn't keep hiding his feelings, not anymore. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something," Jake began, his voice steady but tinged with nervousness. His mom looked up from her cup of tea, giving him her full attention. She hadn't said much since their conversation earlier in the week, but Jake could tell she was waiting for him to say the words. "What's on your mind, Jake?" she asked, her voice soft. Jake took a deep breath and looked down at his hands, the words struggling to form. "I've been avoiding things for a while. I've been pretending everything's okay when it's not. I've been acting like I'm in control, but really, I don't know what I'm doing." His mom didn't interrupt. She just watched him, her eyes filled with patience and concern. "I've been lying to myself, lying to you, and I don't want to do that anymore," Jake continued. "I made a choice the other night, and it was a stupid one. But more than that, I've been letting fear control me. Fear of letting you down, fear of disappointing my friends, and I've been running from it all. I don't know how to fix it, but I need to try. I can't keep going like this." The words hung in the air for a moment before his mom reached across the table and took his hand in hers. "You don't have to fix everything right now, Jake," she said gently. "It's okay to take things one step at a time. You're not alone in this. I'm here, and we'll figure it out together." Jake felt a tear slip down his cheek, and he wiped it away quickly. He hadn't realized how much he needed to hear those words until now. His mom's reassurance, her willingness to stand by him no matter what, gave him a sense of strength he hadn't felt in a long time. It was as if, for the first time in weeks, the fog in his mind was starting to clear. "I don't know where to start," Jake said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I want to be better. I want to be the person I was before all of this. I want to stop hiding, stop pretending. I need to make things right." His mom smiled softly, squeezing his hand. "I believe in you, Jake, and I know you can do it. It's not about being perfect. It's about being real. And that's all I've ever wanted for you, to be true to yourself." Jake nodded, feeling the sense of clarity that had eluded him for so long. It wouldn't be easy, and he knew the road ahead would be filled with challenges. But for the first time in a long while, he felt ready to face those challenges head-on. The fear that had held him back was still there, but now it was something he could confront, something he could work through. "Thanks, Mom," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm ready to start." The weight that had been pressing on his chest for so long seemed to lift, and as Jake sat there with his mom, the two of them sharing a quiet, understanding moment, he felt a sense of peace. He didn't have all the answers, and he didn't know exactly what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to face it alone. And that made all the difference. Jake woke up the next morning with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in a long time. The quiet, familiar hum of the house made him feel strangely at ease. He wasn't sure if it was the lingering feeling of the conversation he had with his mom the night before, or if it was something deeper, something more fundamental, but something inside of him had shifted. The fear and confusion that had clouded his thoughts for so long were slowly starting to fade, replaced by a quiet determination to make things right. His mom had been supportive, but Jake knew that real change wasn't going to come from just having one heart-to-heart conversation. It was going to take work he had to commit to every single day. And that realization was both daunting and empowering. He wasn't going to get everything right all at once. He wasn't going to wake up and suddenly have all the answers, but he knew he had to try. After a quick breakfast, Jake sat down at the kitchen table, his laptop open in front of him. It was time to get back to schoolwork. The weight of his slipping grades had been a constant source of stress, a reminder of how far off track he had gotten. But now, with a renewed focus, he felt ready to take control. He opened his assignments and began to tackle the work he had been procrastinating on for weeks. The subjects that once seemed overwhelming no longer felt like insurmountable obstacles. Slowly but surely, Jake started to reclaim his confidence. As he worked through the assignments, he thought about the steps he needed to take to rebuild his life. He couldn't just focus on his academics. He needed to repair the relationships he had let slip away, the night of the party, and the way he had tried to hide everything from his mom made him realize that his life had become a series of facades. He had tried so hard to be someone he wasn't, to fit in with a crowd that didn't really care about him. In doing so, he had pushed away the people who truly mattered. Jake's thoughts drifted to his friends, especially Matt. He had been the one who had encouraged him to go to that party in the first place, the one who had kept pushing him to drink, to keep partying. But now, Jake saw their friendship in a different light. Matt didn't seem to care about the consequences of their actions. He was just living in the moment, never thinking about the future. And while that lifestyle might have seemed appealing at first, Jake realized it wasn't the life he wanted. But confronting Matt, or any of his friends for that matter, wasn't going to be easy. He had built his whole identity around trying to fit in with them. Their approval had been important to him, and breaking away from that group felt like stepping into the unknown. Jake had to ask himself, who was he without them? And more importantly, who did he want to be moving forward? The thought lingered in his mind as the days passed. At school, he started to pay more attention to his work, engaging in class discussions and participating actively in lessons. The teachers noticed the shift in his attitude. He wasn't just another student going through the motions anymore. He was present, focused, and committed. His grades, while still not perfect, began to improve, and the feeling of accomplishment that came with finishing an assignment felt better than any high he had chased the night of the party. One afternoon, after school, Jake walked to the park. It had always been a place where he could think, clear his mind, and process everything that had happened. He found a bench by the lake, the cool autumn breeze rustling the leaves around him. The sight of the water, calm and still, seemed to match the clarity Jake was starting to feel inside. He sat for a long while, reflecting on the choices he had made. There were so many things he wished he could go back and change. He wished he could undo the lies he had told, the ways he had pushed away the people who cared about him. But Jake also realized something important. He couldn't change the past, no matter how much he wanted to. What he could do was make better decisions moving forward. In the days that followed, Jake made a conscious effort to reach out to the people he had distanced himself from. He texted a few of his classmates, apologizing for the way he had acted, for withdrawing from them when they had tried to be there for him. He reached out to his teachers, expressing his desire to improve and asking for guidance on how to get back on track. It wasn't easy, but it felt like a step in the right direction. The hardest conversation, however, was with Matt. Jake had been avoiding him for days, unsure of how to navigate their friendship now that he had changed. But avoiding the issue only made it worse. So, one evening after dinner, Jake called Matt. He took a deep breath before pressing the dial button, bracing himself for whatever response Matt might have. "Yo, what's up, man?" Matt answered, his voice casual and upbeat. "Hey, Matt," Jake said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "I need to talk to you about something." There was a slight pause on the other end of the line. "Yeah, sure. What's going on?" Jake shifted nervously, but he pushed forward. "I've been thinking a lot lately, about everything. About what happened at that party, and the way I've been acting. I'm not proud of it. I've been hiding a lot, trying to be someone I'm not. And I think I've finally realized that I need to stop pretending. I can't keep doing the things I've been doing." Matt was silent for a moment, and Jake could practically hear the wheels turning in his head. "Look, man, I don't know what's going on with you, but if you're saying you're done partying and stuff, that's cool. But we've been friends for a long time, and you can't just bail on us. You're one of the guys," Matt said, his tone a mix of concern and confusion. Jake felt a wave of sadness wash over him. He realized that for Matt, the idea of their friendship had always been tied to the parties, the drinking, and the fun. But for Jake, things had changed. He had grown up in ways he hadn't expected. And though he knew Matt wouldn't understand fully, he had to be honest. "I'm not bailing on you, Matt," Jake replied softly. I'm trying to figure out who I am without all that stuff. I'm not the same person I was a week ago. And I can't keep pretending like everything is fine when it's not." There was another pause, and Jake felt the tension build in his chest. But then Matt sighed. "All right, man. I get it. If you want to change, that's your choice. But don't forget about us, all right?" Jake's heart lifted slightly. He hadn't expected Matt to get it immediately, but he was relieved that he hadn't completely pushed him away. Maybe things wouldn't be the same, but that didn't mean their friendship had to end. "Thanks, Matt," Jake said, feeling a sense of peace settle in. "I appreciate you understanding." That night, as Jake sat alone in his room, he reflected on how far he had come in just a few days. The road ahead wasn't easy, and there would be challenges and moments of doubt. But Jake had made a choice. He had chosen to be honest with himself, to take ownership of his mistakes, and to move forward with intention. And with each step he took toward rebuilding his life, he began to realize that he wasn't just fixing the mistakes he had made. He was creating something new, something better. It wouldn't happen overnight, but with time, effort, and support, Jake knew he could become the person he was meant to be. And that was worth everything. The days following Jake's conversation with Matt felt different. It wasn't that everything had suddenly fallen into place, but for the first time in a long time, Jake felt like he was moving in the right direction. The uncertainty that had once clouded his mind was slowly being replaced with clarity. He had made a choice to be honest, to face the consequences of his actions, and most importantly, to start rebuilding the relationships that mattered most. It was a crisp Saturday morning when Jake woke up, the sun streaming through his bedroom window. He stretched, feeling the warmth of the light on his skin, and for the first time in weeks, he felt a genuine sense of peace. He wasn't running from anything anymore. He was facing his problems head-on, and though the road ahead was still uncertain, he knew he was on the right path. Jake's mom had been his rock throughout this entire process. She hadn't judged him, hadn't criticized him, but instead, she had given him the space to reflect and make the changes he needed to. After their conversation, she had continued to be supportive, offering him encouragement whenever he doubted himself. And although he knew he couldn't rely on her support forever, her belief in him had been the foundation that allowed him to start trusting in himself again. One of the first steps Jake took after everything had calmed down was to reconnect with his teachers. It had been easy to slide into apathy with his schoolwork, letting assignments pile up and ignoring the classes he once cared about. But now, with a renewed sense of responsibility, he knew that his education was one of the most important things he had to focus on. He emailed each of his teachers, apologizing for his behavior and asking for their help in catching up on missed work. It wasn't easy. Some of his teachers had noticed the change in his demeanor, and they had been concerned, but they were understanding. They saw Jake's genuine effort to turn things around, and they were willing to help. "I'm proud of you, Jake," his history teacher, Mr. Henderson, said when Jake handed in his late assignment the following Monday. "You're taking responsibility, and that says a lot about your character. Keep it up." Jake could hardly believe his ears. For so long, he had been afraid of the consequences of his actions, scared of being reprimanded, or worse, ignored. But now, with every step he took to correct his mistakes, he felt like he was gaining back a piece of himself that he thought he had lost. Mr. Henderson's words, along with the support he was receiving from his other teachers, made him feel like he was capable of more than he had ever given himself credit for. But there was still one area of his life that Jake knew he had to address: his relationship with his dad. It had been a while since Jake had spoken to his father. After the divorce, things had been strained between them. His dad had moved to a different city, and though they tried to stay in touch, the relationship had become distant. For years, Jake had resented his dad for not being around, for not being the kind of father he had hoped for. He had blamed him for the broken family, for the absence that had left a void in his life. And yet, as Jake had grown older, he realized that there was more to the story. His dad had made mistakes, but so had he. Jake hadn't been able to confront his dad about the way he felt, not until now. He had made so many excuses, telling himself that it was easier to let the past go and move forward. But he knew that if he wanted to truly heal, if he wanted to move forward with his life, he couldn't avoid the hard conversations anymore. He had to make amends, not just with his friends and teachers, but with his dad too. On the weekend, after receiving Mr. Henderson's praise, Jake finally picked up the phone and dialed his dad's number. He had been putting it off for weeks, but now, as he waited for the dial tone to connect, he felt a strange mixture of nervousness and relief. It was time to have the conversation he had been avoiding. "Hello." His dad's voice came through the line, a little distant but still familiar. "Hey, Dad. It's Jake," Jake said, trying to sound confident, though his voice shook slightly. "Oh, hey, buddy. How's it going?" his dad replied, his tone light, but with a hint of warmth. "I've been meaning to call you." Jake took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the conversation ahead. "I've been thinking a lot lately, Dad. About everything." "Yeah." His dad's voice softened, sensing the change in Jake's tone. "What's on your mind?" Jake hesitated, trying to find the right words. He had no script, no plan for how this conversation should go. He just knew that he had to speak his truth. "I've been thinking about the way things have been between us, how I've acted, and how I blamed you for a lot of things. I've been holding on to a lot of anger, and I think it's time I let go of that." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Jake wondered if he had said the right thing. "I understand, Jake," his dad said finally. "I know I haven't been the best father. I've made a lot of mistakes, and I'm sorry for the way things turned out. But I'm here now, and I want to be part of your life. If you're ready, I'd like to make things right." Jake's heart pounded in his chest. This was the moment of truth. Could he really forgive his dad for the years of distance, for the mistakes they both had made? He knew it wouldn't be easy, that healing would take time. But in that moment, he felt a shift. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about choosing to move forward, to build something better. "I'm ready, Dad," Jake said, his voice steady and full of resolve. "I think we can work through this. I want to try." They talked for a while longer, catching up on life, sharing stories, and reminiscing about the good times they had shared. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Jake realized that this conversation, this moment of honesty and openness, was a crucial part of his healing process. It wasn't just about fixing his relationship with his dad, it was about fixing the relationship with himself. When the conversation ended, Jake felt a sense of weight lifting off his shoulders. He didn't have all the answers, and things weren't magically better, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was on the path to healing. He was no longer avoiding his past or his mistakes. He was embracing them, learning from them, and using them as fuel to become a better person. The following weeks were a blur of hard work and emotional breakthroughs. Jake continued to focus on his studies, keeping up with his assignments, and participating in class discussions. He worked on reconnecting with his friends, slowly but surely, finding a new balance in his relationships. He started to get involved in extracurricular activities again, joining the school's community service club and volunteering at a local shelter. It felt good to be giving back, to be making a difference in ways that mattered. But more than anything, Jake learned to appreciate the people who had always been there for him. His mom, who had never stopped believing in him, his dad, who was finally ready to step back into his life, and even his friends, who had begun to understand his need for change. Through all of it, Jake learned that real growth came not from running away, but from confronting the hard truths, facing the consequences, and choosing to move forward with integrity. And as Jake sat on the porch one evening, watching the sunset, he realized something profound. Life wasn't about avoiding the mistakes, the pain, or the hard conversations. It was about embracing them, learning from them, and using them to build a better version of yourself. And with every step he took, Jake was becoming that person, someone who was no longer afraid of the future, but ready to embrace it. In that moment, Jake knew that the best was yet to come. Weeks passed, and Jake continued to walk a new path, one that was less about perfection and more about progress. The weight of his past mistakes still lingered, but each day brought new lessons and a renewed sense of hope. Jake had always been driven, but now it was different. His motivation wasn't fueled by the desire to be seen as perfect or to win approval from others. Instead, it came from a deeper place. The desire to be the best version of himself for his own sake, not for anyone else's. Jake had learned that real growth wasn't about erasing mistakes. It was about confronting them and using them to build a better future. He had learned to embrace vulnerability, not as a sign of weakness, but as a source of strength. It was the first step in truly understanding who he was and who he wanted to become. The conversations with his dad and mom had helped Jake understand this new perspective. When he first reached out to his dad, he had been unsure of what would come of it. He had imagined the conversation going in so many different directions, some of them painful, some of them awkward. But when they had spoken, something changed in him. The forgiveness, the openness, and the willingness to move forward had been healing. And Jake realized that his relationship with his dad didn't have to be perfect. It just had to be real. With every conversation, Jake's sense of self grew stronger. He had made amends with the people who mattered most in his life, and though some relationships were still fragile, others were growing deeper, rooted in honesty and understanding. For the first time, Jake felt like he was in control of his own story. But it wasn't just about repairing relationships. It was also about rediscovering the passions that had once brought him joy. Jake had been so consumed with fitting in, with living up to other people's expectations, that he had forgotten about his own dreams. Music had always been a huge part of his life, but over the years, he had let it fade into the background. His guitar, which once sat proudly in the corner of his room, was now gathering dust. His passion for songwriting had been buried beneath layers of stress and self-doubt. One evening, after finishing his homework early, Jake found himself standing in front of his guitar, the familiar shape of it bringing a sense of comfort. He picked it up, strummed a few chords, and immediately felt the weight of the past few months start to lift. Music had always been his escape, his safe place where he could express emotions too complex for words. For the first time in a while, he felt inspired. Without thinking, Jake began to play a melody. The chords flowed easily, and before he knew it, he was humming a tune. The lyrics came next, simple at first, but with each line, they became more honest, more vulnerable. He found himself singing about his struggles, his fears, and his newfound hope. It wasn't a perfect song. It wasn't even close to being finished, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that it came from a place of honesty, a place that was his own. That night, Jake didn't just rediscover his love for music. He rediscovered himself. The weight of trying to live up to other people's expectations, the weight of fear and shame, started to fade with every note. Music wasn't just a hobby. It was a part of who he was, a piece of himself that he had neglected for far too long. The next day, Jake took his guitar to school. He had no grand plans, no expectations. He just felt compelled to share the music he had written, even if it was just with one person. During lunch, he sat down with his friend Lucas, someone he had known for years, but never really connected with on a deeper level. "Hey man," Jake said, pulling his guitar out of its case. "You mind if I play something for you?" Lucas raised an eyebrow but smiled. "Sure, go ahead." Jake took a deep breath and began to play. The song was still rough around the edges, but it felt good to finally share it with someone. As he played, he realized that it wasn't just about getting validation or praise. It was about expressing himself, about being open and vulnerable with someone else. And as Lucas listened, Jake could see the genuine interest in his eyes. "That's really good, Jake," Lucas said when the song finished. "You've got something there, man." Jake smiled, feeling a sense of pride he hadn't experienced in a long time. It wasn't about the recognition. It was about the connection. For so long, he had been afraid to show people who he really was, afraid that they wouldn't accept him or understand him. But here, in this simple moment, Jake realized that it wasn't about being accepted. It was about being authentic, and in that authenticity, he had found something even more powerful than validation. He had found peace. As the days went on, Jake continued to write music, sharing it with a few more close friends. He found himself opening up more and more, not just through his songs, but in his everyday life. He started talking to people about his struggles, about the things that had been weighing on him. It wasn't always easy, and it didn't always go as planned, but with each conversation, Jake felt more liberated. The burden of keeping everything bottled up had been suffocating. Letting it out, expressing his thoughts and feelings, was freeing. One evening, Jake sat down at the kitchen table with his mom. She had been his constant support throughout everything. And now he wanted to share his progress with her, how he had reconnected with his passion for music, how he was starting to feel like himself again. "I wrote a song," Jake said, hesitating for a moment. "I wanted to share it with you." His mom smiled warmly. "I'd love to hear it, Jake." Sitting across from her, guitar in hand, Jake played the song he had written. It was raw, unpolished, but it was honest. Every word, every chord came from a place of vulnerability, and as he played, he could feel a sense of healing washing over him. When the song ended, he looked up at his mom, her eyes filled with tears. "That was beautiful, Jake," she said softly. "You've really come a long way." Jake felt a lump in his throat. "Thanks, Mom. It's not perfect, but it's me." "That's what matters," she replied, squeezing his hand. "You've found your voice." And in that moment, Jake understood exactly what she meant. It wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about fitting into any mold or meeting any external expectations. It was about finding his own voice, his own path, and using that to navigate the ups and downs of life. He didn't have to be flawless. He just had to be real. As the months passed, Jake continued to grow. He kept writing music, working hard in school, and nurturing his relationships. He still had moments of doubt, moments when the fear of failure crept back in, but he didn't let it control him anymore. He had learned to embrace the uncertainty, to see it as a part of the journey rather than something to be avoided. Jake's relationship with his dad also continued to grow. They spent more time together, talking about everything from their shared memories to their hopes for the future. It wasn't easy, and they still had a long way to go, but Jake had learned that rebuilding relationships took time, patience, and a willingness to be vulnerable. It wasn't just about fixing what had been broken. It was about learning to communicate, to be open and honest, even when it was hard. And that, Jake realized, was what had truly changed. His ability to face his fears, to be vulnerable with the people he cared about, and to embrace the messy, beautiful process of becoming who he was always meant to be. As Jake sat in his room one evening, strumming his guitar and reflecting on everything that had brought him here, he realized something important. The person he was becoming wasn't someone who was afraid to fail, someone who was hiding behind a mask of perfection. No, the person he was becoming was someone who was willing to face the truth, to confront his fears, and to embrace vulnerability as a strength. And in doing so, he had finally found the peace he had been searching for all along. The journey wasn't over. There would still be challenges ahead. But Jake knew one thing for certain. He was ready for whatever came next, because he wasn't just living for the approval of others anymore. He was living for himself, and that, he realized, was the greatest gift of all.